Okay.
We're all good now.
All right. Well, look, Pascal Wyse is here, everybody. I just let's all take a moment, count to 10, whatever you need to do. Just absorb that information, okay? So we're going to do an abbreviated intro. And we got to bring the energy because for Pascal, for you, it's like 3 p.m, right?
Yeah, this is slump time.
Slump time. Well, for me, it's 8 a.m.
Oh my God, I hadn't even factored that in.
Yeah, I know.
That's
I just
ridiculous.
rolled out of bed, but let's get this started. Come on.
Did you have like 14 coffees?
Oh, man. Welcome to the Podcast Engineering Show.
Oh my God,
yeah,
this is
baby.
immense.
Oh, my God. Welcome, everyone, to the show. Yeah, what's up, Pascal?
You sound like you're mostly made of caffeine. It's brilliant. It's like, yeah.
Well, I did drink. What did I drink? Oh, I drink these Monster Rehab drinks. It's like an iced tea and lemonade mix, and it has caffeine in it, and it has 0 sugar.
Oh, God. Yeah, you could probably get to the moon on that stuff.
Well, anyway, thank you, everyone, for tuning in. This is the Podcast Engineering Show. I'm Chris Curran. I produce podcasts. I teach podcast production at Podcast Engineering School. And if you listen to this show every week, man, you will just glean and absorb so much information that your podcast production will get a lot better. We have great guests on the show today. Well, I'm not going to jinx anything, but today's guest is world class. All right, I should have muted myself when I said that, so Pascal, you didn't hear me.
Yeah.
All right, but Pascal Wyse is here. He produces he composes and does sound design for the show Cautionary Tales. Have you heard the show Cautionary Tales, everybody? This is a podcast that I really like. I think I was turned on. It's a Pushkin Industries show, right, Pascal?
Yeah, that's right. Pushkin Industries, yeah.
Yeah. So Malcolm Gladwell.
And yeah, that's right. Malcolm Gladwell's place. And it's presented by a guy called Tim Harford, who he's probably more well known to audiences here in the UK. He does a couple of shows on Radio 4 and he has a newspaper column. And he's principally an economist. But when he was growing up, he had this fascination with a book that kind of went from everything from, really dramatic and tragic to kind of very funny. But it was great cock-ups of the world, basically, and why they happened and how they happened. And this series is based on a lot of those tales, cautionary tales, really, for grown-ups. And they take stories such as the massive oil spill in the 70s just off the coast of the UK with an oil tanker called the Torrey Canyon. And he kind of extracts life lessons that we can learn from why these things happened. Another one, for instance, is about how the wrong Oscar got announced, in the La La Land.
Right.
So a lot of fun. It's good, lots of different places to go and stuff like that. But yeah, it's been a really nice series, and I think the green light is shining for season 2. So fingers crossed.
Yeah, it's really well done, and I like the way you did the sound design and mixing on it, because you also do the mixing, which is really important to me. And so I was really happy. I reached out to you and you responded because, it's so cool. Like, we're going to go through the speed round, and I also want to ask you about, your past and your education. But first, I just want to mention that you also worked on a show. Is it a show called Folsom Untold?
Yeah, it was, I guess you'd call it a show, but it went out as a series with Audible. So I suppose, it's their podcast division. So I know that they do a lot of books and stuff. So it goes out, via those channels. And so I think it might have all been released, in one dollop rather than like a weekly thing, Yeah, that was the story of Johnny Cash's various trips to perform gigs in prison and how they happened and kind of why they happened, and also his murky kind of relationship with some of the people in the prisons. I sound designed and mixed that, and I did the theme tune for it, but I didn't score it in the way that, say, Cautionary Tales, I scored that. Sometimes these things are a function of budget, sometimes time, sometimes it's also just about how much music somebody wants in a show. If they want it completely wallpapered, that's sometimes, if you're doing bespoke material, that's pretty hard on a tight time scale and a tight budget. But they got some good stuff in there. That was fun too. Again, it's really nice when podcasts step away from commentary and they go into a world, a bit of drama. It's great to have bits of that. Actually, that same team, but this time with a company called Panoply, who I think will be well known in the US. We did a show called Haunted, which was kind of contemporary ghost stories, interviews with people who believe in ghosts and believe they've had experiences with them. So again, lots to get your teeth into there in terms of when they start recreating their experience. You get the chains out and stick the reverb on.
Oh, that's so cool.
So that was good fun too. Yeah.
Oh, cool! I didn't know you.
I'm going to just blab on about me until you interrupt.
Yeah, no, we're going to get into stuff. This is good though. See, me and my audience, we're not used to having a guest like you. So
I like it. I'm exotic. It's like you've come to the zoo to the special cage in the corner.
It's really good. Well, let's do the speed round. So just to be clear, so everyone understands, you do not host any podcasts like with your own voice, but you just obviously do composing, sound designing, and mixing. And so let's use Cautionary Tales because it really is. It's really a well done show. It's a story.
Thank you.
Tim Harford and everything you do. It's just really well done. So let's go through that. So for one episode of Cautionary Tales, give us within, I'd say, a minute or two, give us your whole post-production workflow. Where do you get the files? How, what DAW do you assemble them? And what sort of processing do you use? Where do you mix it down to? Just give us the quick picture.
Yeah. Okay. Woo. So
I know.
We will have, the pressure round. We'll have what's called a table read at Tim's house of the script. That might happen actually quite some time before I work on it, but that will just be to kind of set out some simple kind of thoughts as to where areas would be good to have music and sound design and all the rest of it. They will then go off to some studio and record Tim doing his parts. And at that point, he will just read in the actor lines because there are a few parts that are kind of dramatically reenacted by other performers. They won't have been got by then, so he'll just read those in, so I've at least got them. So I will receive a sound file with Tim on one stem and anything else on another stem if they've managed to get it. If there's particular bits of archive they want in there, or maybe they have already got the actors, stuff like that. Anyway, I'm really way over the minute already. We haven't even got into the room.
It's okay.
It's ridiculous. Now I'm quite, I can get quite grumpy at this point because I make I try to. Don't get me wrong. In other podcasts, I will do this, but in this case, I really wanted them to get the dialogue as clean as possible, because we'll get onto this. You operate with many heads when you're mixing, sound designing, and composing for a podcast. But I find it pretty difficult to kind of be thinking about doing a sound cue or a music cue while also having to kind of keep an eye on how the coughs and the ums and ahs or whatever.
Right.
So fortunately, working with a great producer, and he got me a really nice clean take. So I get these takes. I in this case I used Pro Tools. We'll get on to the business of me being quite a tart when it comes to DAWs. I sleep around a bit. But anyway, in this case, I knew I was going to do it in Pro Tools, so I slap it into Pro Tools, and I'll hit play, and I will put some markers down, just simple location markers saying, it could be, something here, ? Or, at this stage, I'll also be cutting into the dialogue because obviously a producer will space it out to a degree, but they're not really thinking about music and sound design at that point. So I'll be starting to put in little spaces where I think, we're going to have something here. We're going to need a beat here to get over that last scene or whatever it is. So I'll just start to get the geography of it, slightly laid out. Then I'll shove in the theme music. If it was episode 1, I'd be putting the theme music in. If it's beyond that, I'll have started to work up a template kind of based on that first episode. That's not more or less how I work.
Right.
So we've got the voice part in, and then I think what I would normally do then is, there are passages and bits of it where you just know there's something pretty uncontentious. It's just literally the sound of something. So I'll go through and I'll get those things just kind of put in. Now I have a lot of recordings of my own because I'm very into field recording. I'd love to say that I have a rule that I always make stuff for the shows. But two things on that. One is, there are not a lot of World War II tanks rumbling around where I live. And the other thing is, it's just time. Time
right.
Really restricts that process if when you get into the kind of timetabling we had for this show. So getting out and about with microphones to record important sound effects, I'd love to do it. I'd love to do it more. I do some, but obviously there's also some library stuff that gets stuck in there. Okay. But I do like to play around with it a bit, try and own it a bit more, within the context of the podcast. So we'll sort of get onto that.
Okay.
That it can be something simple, like just putting it in a room, or I'm very keen on altiverb and the convolution reverbs for that. As I say, we'll get onto that. So I'll get some of those simple spot sound effects in. If I know we're going to need to hear a telephone or a door shutting or whatever, or a gun going off. And then the next layer will be really, I'll pass through again, and this time I'll be thinking a bit more about the kind of worlds that people are in and whether we need to hear that world. We don't always have to, but if someone's gone into an office or a big warehouse, or it's the atmosphere is set as being raining hard and on a freezing cold night, I'll start to grab some of that stuff and put it in. And then then it's through to the. I mean, I'm making these things sound as if they literally happen one after the other. There's a bit of a mix up, I mean, I might sort of dive in and stick down a few music ideas while I'm in the middle of sound effects. Right. But then I'll go through doing the music. I'm going to accelerate here because I know you're going to unpack this later.
It's all good.
So at that point I will. So let's say I've got a first pass of the show together. I then sort of move into. It's a bit of a dark art. I mean, I there's no way I would call myself in any way experienced at mastering, but I'll do some basic things in the the final part of the signal chain when I render it out, just to kind of bring the stuff together. Just let me just hang on. Let me just turn you up.
Okay.
I put my foot on a fader and it disappeared for a while. So there's the music in, and I'll do a render out. I'll send it out, and then I will start to get feedbacks and comments, normally on a kind of shared online script. Now and then, it all starts to unravel. Then it's that process of adjusting and tweaking and repeating that process until everyone's happy. I mean, that's the kind of crash through. I'm not giving you a lot of technical detail there, but that's really what it is. We can go through a little bit more specifically what that entails, if you like.
Yes, I do want to go through this more specifically. One thing I'm very curious about right at the beginning is this idea of you creating space. Like you said, you try to figure out what worlds are people in, and do we need to hear that world, and then what does that world sound like, and then how do you create that? So what are some of the tools you use to create that space? And well, first, are you making it? I mean, most people listen on headphones. Do you sort of mix it for headphones for a sort of 3D experience, or is it just more generally a space?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'm always, as with so many things, in this business of producing podcasts, which is because we're involved with doing so many aspects of the job, wherein perhaps in other worlds like film and TV, you might find that that one person deals with one bit of it, whereas we are kind of creating this whole thing, which on the one hand is really exciting because you can really play with mixing up sound design and music and you know, and sort of merge those borders. But on the other hand, you know, it's a lot of work and it's stressful. But yeah, I mean, I like to mix on speakers, but I'm very aware that, you know, let's face it, most people will probably digest this thing on the headphones. Right. So what will happen is that any of the stages where I'm, you know, just throwing stuff in there and building it, I won't be worrying too much about, you know, any panning or spatialization at that stage. I'll just be getting the material in. Right. And when it gets to kind of mixing proper, the final pass will definitely be on headphones just to make sure. You know, because there's always those things that are very different in headphones. The whole idea of the, you know, the kind of stereo imaging, if you like, and also the effects of things like reverbs are obviously pretty different in cans. So, and I know that they're all going to be listening to them on headphones. So I do a pass. You know, my final mix pass is always, okay, let's get this into the headphones and see how it's working out.
And in general, like, how do you create the space? Is it just reverb, or do you use other effects as well?
Well, so space. I suppose in you know, environments and space, they're sort of interchangeable, aren't they? I mean, but if let me try and give an example. There's one of the episodes which is all about a competition to produce the best airship, and there are two firms competing in this, and one of them is up in a kind of really rusty, rickety, windy, you know, shed up in the north of England in Yorkshire, where I'm from actually. And so with that, I will definitely quite often like to mix a couple of reverbs, and my go-to is always something in Altiverb, which you probably know about, and there's a convolution reverb. I just think that in terms of a believability, convolution reverbs are great. You know, I think the ear is very sensitive to the kind of more chaotic sounds of the real world rather than the kind of, you know, some kind of clinical form of reverb. So I will. And, you know, in an example like that, the narrator will be just sat in their ordinary, you know, dry world. And it might be that I'm just building a world that's sort of sitting around them, of maybe people working away in this workshop, you know, or scribbling on pads of paper or writing on typewriters. So that, yeah, I'll often mix up a bit of Altiverb with a you know, more of an algorithmic reverb. For the simple reason that I think that generates something a little bit unique, you know, perhaps a sound that people haven't automatically heard before. And then I find it useful, and this is not, you know, my own technique. It's something that I've discussed a lot with a great wildlife sound recordist over here called Chris Watson. I like to kind of try and think in three layers. You got your general atmos, you know, your wild track, as you might call it, in kind of often in filmmaking terms, you know, this quite quiet and uneventful background sound. And then you have what you might call a habitat. So if you think of it in wildlife terms, that could be like a tree. So you got these vast plains, and that's your general sound. And then you've got a tree, so that's a specific habitat you're listening to. And then you have like a featured species, which say could be a bird. I mean, and these terms can be, you know, this is wildlife, but you could apply it in different ways. So try and think of those three perspectives. You know, is there some very low level sound that's always going on in this place? So, for instance, in the warehouses I just spoke about, I knew that from the narration that it was meant to be raining outside. So, you know, I added in some sort of rain on corrugated roofing, but, you know, very, very, very low. So it's just there to kind of, psychologically, it's kind of working on you, but you're not sat there thinking, oh wow, it's really wet in here. You know?
Right.
And then, you know, and then if we're talking about someone in that particular environment, you know, where are they sat, and what is it they're hearing in their more immediate world, you know, and that's been the sort of people working away at this airship. And then maybe there's one or two little sounds that are to do with right close to them if we're with them, In this case, I think this guy was bashing away angrily on a typewriter, complaining about resources or something. So, then I might get to that level. Of course, all of this has to kind of dance around the narrator a bit. It doesn't want to get in the way. But yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else I particularly use in that. Well, obviously, atmospherically, music becomes important. But what's really nice to do, and this goes back to me talking about how, we end up doing all the jobs. I really like to try, if I can, and build the music using some sounds that might have come from that world anyway, I mean, you might, maybe there's a very sort of low rumble of a generator in the background. If I take a sound like that and actually layer it up almost as a musical instrument and create like a drone in the background, a chord, even that might just add a little bit of tension.
Right.
It's really nice that sound has come from that real world, if you see what I mean.
Right.
So that's part of generating place as well. Music has an effect on that, although it's rather than necessarily place, that's starting to move towards the kind of emotion of the thing. What kind of, okay, we're in a place, but what's the kind of atmosphere? How's it feeling to be here? Does that answer the point?
Yes, it does. And also, I'm curious now. And this, by the way, I'm just going to be so all over the place this episode because I'm so interested in like a million things that you're doing. But when you talk about,
I'll feel at home in that case. Yeah.
When you talk about using music and, composing music for situations like that you just described, do you just play chords on a piano and say, oh, that sounds good, or oh, that doesn't? Or do you know like what keys to play in? Like what key of music, or how do you make a piece of music feel a certain way?
Yeah, wow, that's a very good big question. Yeah,
that's a huge one. I know.
Yeah, no, I'd love to say that. There's kind of two layers. I can busk a really clever answer, or I can just be completely honest and say, I'm throwing crap at the wall until it works.
Right. Well, but, and if you are just playing stuff to see how it feels, but there's a point when you know what feels right, right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So what's interesting is, I've got the theme tune to this podcast. So sometimes I'll come out maybe and use the same key as that if I but yeah, I mean, to answer your question, yeah, this is by no means the ideal way of working in all situations. Sometimes I will try and step away from all of the kind of infinite possibilities of all these virtual instruments that are sat there, because that is, that's pretty paralyzing. I will try and step away from that and sit down with a bit of paper and try and jot maybe some melody or something that I feel has just come from inside me, rather than I'm being led by this extraordinary array of instruments. Right. But oftentimes, in a podcast environment, you're underscoring. You want to be present but not getting in the way. And I have found a lot of the time working with people in the kind of podcast community that they're quite sensitive to the music, driving people to some emotional place too forcefully. And it's good to be sensitive to that, because we all know when we're being a bit over manipulated. But that means that a lot of the music will be sort of bubbling under, and I'll start by sort of thinking, is this something that's going to move slowly underneath the words, or is it something that might have a bit more rhythmic activity to it? So that's a good place. And if I know it's going to be like just a long, maybe sort of quite drone-like chord, it will be a case of finding an instrument that I feel is, appropriate. Now, how do you do that among just a baffling, thousands of instruments? Well, again, for me, I always like to try and narrow the options by thinking about sounds that are relevant to that world. If we're in a factory, then I might look at sounds that come from kind of glass and steel. The ringing of a metal bell or something, and then stretching that and building it into a chord or something. This is just because, otherwise I'm just sat there in front of an army of instruments and it's just paralyzing. I was like, well, God, I could just go anywhere here. You follow a kind of a gut instinct towards the sound world. And then, just start playing around. And it's incredible how if you just put 3 notes down sounding together, and you move one of them, how that just, steers the thing.
Right.
You don't have to do very much often, I mean, obviously, musicians, there's a straightforward way in which people talk about sort of major chords being a little bit happier than the minor chords, and that's a very blunt, happy, sad version.
Right.
But as you add notes in and you shift chords around, you get subtle blends, where you're moving gently from something that's more or less sounds comfortable, that a little bit of unease creeps in, by adding just one note. So yeah, really, I am improvising at that point. I'm trying a few things out.
Yeah, like an artist.
That being said,
which is great.
Yeah, trying stuff out, and there's a real push pull to this, because on the one hand, I reckon, if you gave me a year to write something, I mean, I'd leave it till December and then get in a panic. I mean, some restriction, some creative limitation is incredibly valuable to actually getting a job done. It's great if you can say to yourself, I'm only going to use, this set of instruments or like, almost like create a band and stick with it.
Right.
There's a great composer called Cliff Martinez who, I think I got the name right. Yeah. Who did Solaris, the more recent Solaris film. And the story goes that he had a kind of policy whereby if he'd bought a new musical instrument, he's a percussionist, I think, initially by sort of training or whatever. He said, I have to use that instrument on my next job. And when he, when he did Solaris, he'd bought this very beautiful, I think, set of either bowls or it's a lovely percussion instrument, either glass bowls or sort of metal bowls. I'm not sure. But anyway, he said, right, I've got to use them. My rule is I'm going to use them, And of course, turned out one of the most beautiful and often copied and loved scores because of that.
Right.
So, you need restriction, you need limitation. And I get that, of course, but sometimes that vice just clamps down a bit too hard. So if I'm doing a show, say a 40-minute show, and I've got 4 days to do everything on it, as well as take in edits and notes, I haven't really got the luxury of going, of kind of fine tuning forever some little chord progression. I basically have to, as soon as it starts to work, I have to go, right, fine, yeah, let's work with that,
Right, and that's where the experience comes in, because you can write a little chord progression, and because you have so much experience, you can say, yep, that's good enough, that'll work, and then move on, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's flattering that I've got that you put it like that, and it's very nice. I mean, I do. Yeah, I mean, although people may wince at the notion of like, that's good enough, move on. That's practically, that's kind of what it is a lot of the time. It's doing the job it needs to do, and we all know what it's like sometimes. When, as I said at the beginning, when we're given that endless faffing around, fiddling time. You end up back at where you started often.
Yeah.
Sometimes those quick initial ideas, they're just right and they work, and don't take it apart. But as I say, that's it's quite a forgiving when you're doing underscore. I couldn't really. I had to think a bit more carefully, say when writing the theme tune or whatever, because that's that's probably the only moment in the show where people are forced to listen to my music without anyone else talking. Right. So it's got to be right.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Couple things I want to mention before we move on. I don't know if you've ever heard of Rick Beato on YouTube. He has a YouTube channel, and he talks all about music theory, and it's just, I don't know much about music theory, but he also makes videos about recording and microphones and everything, but he also does a lot on music theory, and it is unbelievable. Music theory is mind-boggling. It's tremendous.
Oh, God, yeah. I mean, this is such a cliche. It's such an awful cliche, but it's so true. I mean, I feel kind of it was a few years ago that I decided to kind of throw my eggs into one basket and settle on music and sound design. I've done lots of different things, even though I originally started in music. And it's almost like the more I do it, the more I realize I don't know, and the more I get imposter syndrome. I mean, I'm getting better all the time, but all it's doing is opening 1,000 more doors that I realize, God, wow, I didn't know about that. And, and it's kind of scary in a way. It's the more you progress, the more you realize you don't know. So it's like any answer I give today, it's almost like, a year from now, it could be really different, or technically I might do things really differently. But that's part of the excitement. You're kind of finding ways as you go along. And as we know, there are so many different solutions to the same problem, music theory. Yeah. Wow. I mean, there's, you never stop learning with that.
Yeah. And it's unbelievable. And he actually has a son who has perfect pitch, and Rick will play on the piano these complex chords, literally 8 or 10 notes in a chord, and his son will, with his back turned, listen to the chord and be like, "Oh, that's a D minor 7th over B flat augmented," and his dad and Rick will be like, "Okay, sing through the notes in that chord," and he'll be like, B G D F, and like he'll nail everything. It's like superhuman. It's awesome.
Yeah. We had a guy like that at college, and a friend of mine used to go, "God, yeah, he has the ears of the devil." He used to almost freak him out, He could go to a concert and then walk out and play what he just heard on a piano, It was really freaky.
So cool. Let's get into equipment, because you said you like to you like to mix on speakers. So what kind of monitors do you use?
I've got a little pair of the Genelec 1029s, which are, I suppose they're quite a few years old now, paired up to a sub, again Genelec, but from a later generation of speakers.
Okay.
Now, I mean, this is a good area where it's really hard for me to say, I've been through. I've road tested so many monitors, and these are the ones I'm happy. I mean, it's just, it's literally like I had worked on these, or good friends of mine who do a lot of work with 3D sound, were very into them. I'd worked with them. I'd heard them, so it was like a devil I knew. And I just went for a pair, and I haven't looked back. It's one of these things where I think there's always a trade-off between having a piece of equipment that and you've got used to, and you kind of know its idiosyncrasies, and going on this mad internet search for the perfect monitor. So I really like the Genelecs. I know people who don't, and I know people who say they'll never use anything but Genelec. Whether I can give you a good technical description of why they're good or bad, basically, I can't. I mean, I've had them, I've used them, I've got used to them. It seems to work okay. They're, it's like a world. I could go into that world and it's an expensive world, I suppose, but and start playing around with different monitors. But I think basically you'd never see me again.
Yeah,
just down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, that's how everything is. Even with plugins, right? Like I just literally 2 episodes ago on this show, Chris Williams told me about a great compressor plugin, and I'm like, so I went and tried it, and I was like, oh my God, this is tremendous. And I would have never known. Like, and there's probably 100 things that are great that I'll never know in my whole life.
Yeah, I know. This is it. We're all trying to deal with this infinity of stuff. I mean, I had a good one on. I mean, just accepting your thing of skipping around a little bit. I mean, one of the things I found really tricky on Cautionary Tales, and this is a fairly familiar tale for anyone working, say, particularly with music to picture. So you've got this episode that's kind of 40 minutes long, and you can more or less divide it up. There's a bit of music here, there's a bit of music there, and so you could call it music cues, And at the moment, or the way I worked, I had it was all in one session, right? So, and that can get a bit messy, and it also gets quite tricky when you want to, say, do something really different with tempo, or in the music. I mean, sure, you can tempo change, but it can really unravel. If you suddenly decide that you want to change the speed of some music earlier in the session, and it can start to throw everything out. There are solutions to that. Some people do this thing, in film, for instance, where they write their music in Logic and they have Pro Tools running in the background as a place to kind of send each cue. The film is running on Pro Tools and they kind of drop the music in. But, that's a layer of complexity that does my head in, kind of running Pro Tools behind something else. And I just, only like 2 weeks ago, I discovered that Reaper has this amazing thing called sub-projects, which is so cool. It's just like, it would have been ideal for working on Cautionary Tales. So what you can do is you can kind of, it's like, so you've got your project open, and then you can define a little bit of, on the timeline within that project. Right. Let's say it's a bit where you're going to do a certain cue of music, and you just say, create sub-project. And that just opens up as a tab. It's just another working, session, if you like. And it's exactly of the length that you selected in the master session. So you fiddle around in your sub-project and you write a bit of music. As soon as you hit save, it renders the session out and plops it back into the master session. So you can go back and have a listen and see how it works. And it's just so cool. It works so well. And you can, if you adjust it, any instance of it back in the master session will adjust, and, you can copy bits of it across, and it's really good. It means you can really change your working practice, say, for one of the cues, rather than, and it's a really cool thing. But life is like that. You go along for years doing it a certain way, and then someone, usually some, annoying geek, comes in and goes, Did you not realize that you can just push that and then the whole thing will get done? And you sort of tear your hair out because you've been kind of doing 1,000 mouse clicks to get something to happen, and you can see your life disappearing in moments like that. So I'm on that journey all the time. I'm not a ninja on any of these DAWs, and I think part of the reason for that is I have tended to flit about. Logic is very good for certain kinds of music writing. Pro Tools is very, obviously solid on audio, but it annoys me on certain things. I don't want to get into rubbishing particular producers. I probably will always use it for some things, but when I'm working for picture particularly and any 3D stuff, I get more and more impressed by Reaper. I think it's amazing. It's so light on its feet, and and adjustable. But the downside of kind of whoring around like this is, you never end up super quick on one particular station. But hey, that's all right. I can manage that.
Yeah. So actually, my compatriot here, Barry, he's in studio. You haven't heard him yet, Pascal,
okay.
But he's here.
Barry
and
is lurking.
I just want to ask Barry a question. Barry, because I do use Reaper, but I don't do anything as crazy as what Pascal's doing. So and I don't consider myself a DAW expert either. So what are Pascal and I going to need to really get clear on all the DAWs and the best workflow? What are we going to need?
You're going to need a couple of horses or a couple of mules.
No, that's it? Okay.
Wow.
All right.
This guy is enigmatic.
He really...
Is he like your sage?
He has the answers. That's right. Oh, my God. What about headphones? What kind of headphones do you use?
What am I listening to you on? I'm listening on a pair of Bayer Dynamics. I think the DT990s, are they?
Okay.
No, hang on, I'll take them off.
Okay.
Yeah, the 990s with the open back, or whatever you call it. Actually, because I do quite a lot of field recording. And a lot of my recording equipment, like multi-track recorders and mics and stuff, is kind of from that area of going out into the wild and recording stuff.
Okay.
Animals and atmospheres and you name it. So in that world, I'll often use just something really simple like the Sennheiser HD25 closed back things. But in here I've got the Bayers. I have this thing called SonarWorks, which is one of those.
Yes, I do too.
Yeah, and it feels like voodoo to me, and I have this real problem with trusting it. I don't know whether you have that.
Oh.
Not because I think it is untrustworthy. It's just like I sort of say to myself, God, is it really right? Is it really getting that right? You know, and I it's almost like you know how, you know, way back when people was suspicious of new technology, like, you know, cameras would take your soul, whatever. It's almost like I'm looking at this thing going, no, how can it really be doing? Really? Have I got? Because it's quite dramatic, you know. If you pull down the settings for, say, this pair of headphones, you know, it's really interesting what it does to it.
Yeah.
And I think I've been consuming quite a lot of this thing called mixing with Mike, you know, on YouTube.
Okay.
And he's very good at kind of talking about how persuadable and malleable our hearing is. You know, we're not in. There's nothing kind of definitive about our hearing. It changes, and it's adjustable, it's malleable, and we will compensate internally for all kinds of things that happen in the sound world. You know, I think. Sorry, I keep knocking the mic. I think back to when, you know, I studied music in the Victorian era. I tell you, I mean, I can remember the Korg M1 keyboard coming out and thinking, wow, that's amazing. I mean, that piano sound is just, that's it. You know, we've done pianos now. And if you listen to it now, it's hilarious. I mean, it's just, you know, you know, it's just, and there's you know, you list those stories of Edison demonstrating his wax cylinders or whatever. You know, they had these really kind of magical performances where an opera singer would come on and she would sing, and then start to mime as the cylinder started to play. Now, from our perspective now, most people would just sort of laugh at the idea that you couldn't tell the difference between the two. You know, I mean, can you imagine sticking on a gramophone or, you know, versus someone singing in a room and being persuaded they were but people they were totally fooled by this, you know. And it just shows how much our ears are, you know, we're not working in a fixed system. They're persuadable. They are, you know, what is considered to be hi-fi at one moment is not the next. And again, going back to an earlier point, it's almost like, you know, and I've worked with mix engineers who kind of almost fall not into two schools. That would be making it too simplistic. But I've worked with guys who literally say, I've got you know, I have a setup that I understand, and I understand the room, and beyond that, it doesn't really matter. The equipment could have all kinds of faults, but the important thing is I understand them. Right. And then you get people who are just endlessly pursuing, you know, the latest thing and the kind of, you know, the flat response curve or whatever. I just think to know, you know, I mean, honestly, I'm only just getting anywhere near kind of worlds like reference mixes and really trying to make stuff work on all kinds of little speakers. This is something I feel like a bit of a child in, you know. But I do think there's a lot to be said for understanding your system and understanding its foibles, and then you will understand how to work with it rather than sort of changing around all the time, you know. So the SonarWorks thing I love, because I'm in I used to have a studio in a garden, and we recently moved, and so I'm in a spare room now, and as you can probably hear, it's pretty imperfect for any from many points of view. So something like SonarWorks is great, hopefully, for adjusting that. I just got to trust it. I've got to learn to trust it.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, I got it. I tried it for my monitors, and I have these Neumann monitors, and they're pretty good. And I got SonarWorks, and I got their microphone, and I literally did all the tone testing with their microphone, and I created a profile for my studio here for my speakers, and when I apply that EQ curve that flattens out the speakers, it really does make a big difference. And now like it makes such a difference that when I listen to it without the SonarWorks on and with it off and with it on, there's a stark difference. Like without the SonarWorks, there's like a low mid sort of muddiness. And it's subtle, but it's there. And then when I put it on, it's like cleared up. And so anyway, in my room on my monitors, it actually works really well. and I'm really happy with it.
That's interesting.
So, yeah.
I mean, I didn't use their mic, and I think maybe my my superstition comes from the fact that I use my own DPA Omni mic to do the testing, and it's a pretty flat mic, but maybe that's what feeds my insecurity that I didn't do it properly, I mean, who knows? I mean, Genelec do monitors with a similar technology built in, where they're listening to the room all the time. And I have friends in a studio who say they are basically like some kind of voodoo. It's incredible what they do. I mean, that you can stick them in the most god-awful space and it kind of does a little analysis, and then ping, all the imaging, everything all suddenly pops back out.
Really?
That's pretty clever, yeah. I can't remember what they call it. Something like SAM or something.
So there's like microphones on the speaker itself.
They're on a little separate unit that you you put them somewhere. I'm not sure where. Okay. And it has this software that listens to the room, and I think it always stays on. It's always like real time processing. But wow. People I know who've used them say they're pretty miraculous. Particularly, and let's face it, I think this more and more of us are in a way in not 100% perfect studio environments.
Yeah.
I mean, I have to go off. I have friends who have a good studio with a booth and everything, so I can go if I need to do some Foley recording. I'll go off and do that. I can get away with short things in here, but there's no way I can. And I've managed to do the odd bit of trombone, and get away with it. But yeah. Where did we get? Where are we in our labyrinth that we're making for ourselves?
So I also got the SonarWorks for my headphones. I actually bought headphones from SonarWorks, and they literally tested my pair of headphones in their shop, and then they came up with a custom curve for my headphones. And I don't know, I like it.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, well, I mean, I think it'd be interesting. I suppose one quite good way of testing it would be that old thing of, dragging a mix you've done on that onto lots of different kinds of little speakers and, laptops and what have you, and just see if you're generally getting it more bang on because of your new headphones. I wouldn't be surprised if that would be the case.
Right. So let's go through. I want to talk about what microphones you own and what field recorders you own. So can you talk about that?
Sure, yeah. I've got some. Well, what have I got? Okay. I use a recorder made by a company called Sonosax, who are a Swiss company, which is a really lovely, it's very light, incredibly clean sounding preamps. I also have a recorder made by a company called Arton, called the Kantar X, which you probably see in them if you know that little picture of my setup. It's lurking in the bottom right hand corner. That's an extraordinary piece of kit. I mean, you could literally record the end of the world on that, and it would just go, yeah, fine, carry on. It's indestructible.
Really,
it's kind of waterproof and sandproof. Yeah, they use them a lot on. I mean, the new version of it, they use a lot on films because you can literally, they're bomb proof. They have this incredibly cool mixer on top, which is, as I say, waterproof because the little buttons that you slide up and down are, in fact, they have magnets on them, and they're driving a little ball bearing underneath on a circuit board. So there's no holes or anything to get in. And you can literally just pick these little magnets off, and pop them back on there. It's very cool.
What's the name of that model again? The company and model?
That's a company called Arton, Aaton, and Kantar. I think they're on the X3 now. I used to use Sound Devices a lot, which are great things. But I worked with a guy on a film who had one of these, and they just, they're brilliant. They're really so solid. What got me into field recording was this guy, Chris Watson, who does amazing wildlife sound recording and has worked on a lot of the big David Attenborough wildlife shows. Years and years ago, he was in a band called Cabaret Voltaire, and experimental electronic music group from Sheffield here in the UK. I interviewed him, and I really got the bug. When you spend a lot of time indoors in front of screens, to actually get out and engage with the world with some microphones is lovely. I love the challenge of outdoor recording, and I love the way it creates an experience around listening to sound. If getting up at 3 a.m. to go and record a dawn chorus, it's a very memorable experience. The physicality of it, just having to get there and sort of 100 meters of cable, and planting mics around, and it creates a kind of an experience that you attach to the sound, and it involves you. It makes you listen to the world differently. I kind of almost use these machines like some people use cameras. It's a way I like to kind of remember a place. I mean, great anecdote about that was I was very fortunate to go to the Antarctic once and record out there on a trip. And on the way back, I was with about 90 or so other people on this boat, and almost everyone obviously had cameras and video cameras, and they were just whirring all the time, on the penguins and you name it. I was the only one weirdo there, with a microphone in a Rycoat fluffy, and they just kind of they were like, "What are you doing?" And on the way back, so it's obviously a pretty hefty journey. One of the scientists had a thing where they would do some lectures on the way back. There was quite a lot of learning going on, and he liked to gather from the people who'd been on board, their best photographs, best little video clips, maybe 3 from each, and they were all went on as then a DVD, which we all got, when we got off the boat. And he said to me, "Oh, can you, can we have some of your sounds?" And I said, "Yeah, sure," and gave him a few bits and pieces. And actually, the kind of perfect, someone came up to me afterwards and said the perfect thing. They said, I had no idea what you were doing, and I didn't really understand. I thought, why would someone want to record, here? And now that I've heard some of the sounds, I get it. And he then said, really kind of like the thing that you most want to hear, which is, when I look at my photographs, I'm reminded of where I've just been. When I listen to the sounds, I'm basically back there, which is a really powerful kind of thing that, and it's the alchemy we're all playing with, in podcasting in various different ways,
Yeah.
So I love to get out and record places. Often that will be wildlife inspired, but it doesn't have to be. It can be, it could be anything from, crowds, football match, or a railway station. It's part of that kind of philosophy of musique concrète that, the world is kind of crammed full of interesting sound and music if you just listen. I think it was John Cage who said more or less that, there's plenty of music going on, you just have to pay attention, Right. So it's a long way around of saying that most of the microphones I have are kind of geared towards that world, if you like.
Right.
So so for instance, with the Sennheiser MKH range, which are very kind of well road tested in that world, they're, one of the things that's traditionally been great about those is you can kind of leave them out in awful conditions and they'll survive, I use the MKH stuff. My absolute, one of my real faves is the tiny omnidirectional lavalier mics made by DPA. They're just fantastic because you can just get them into extraordinary places. Obviously we know what these are designed for. These are, people on stage, or you can see them strapped to the side of their heads or whatever, or on film sets, buried under costumes. But they're superb just as general mics. You can use them as a spaced stereo pair, or you can go, you can go around poking them into things. I've made a recording of maggots inside a severed pig's head using one of these things.
Wow, I need that audio.
Yeah, it's funny. It just sounds like rain. But I was, it was just. But yeah, then the flies come. Yeah, it gets disgusting. I mean, I was working with a couple of artists who were doing a project all about death. And they had this, it was ridiculous. They went and got this pig, this dead pig sort of lying around in their house. And they wanted to watch it go through the various stages of decay. And obviously, so there was this pig's head staring at me with maggots and everything. And you get these tiny mics and you can shove them in. And it's great. Get the microphone where you can't put your ears. That's fun.
Oh, I love that. Reminds me of a contest I wanted to have for podcast engineering school. I wanted to give a prize. I wanted to have everyone send in the most disgusting sounding audio that they could possibly record.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
How long have you got?
Well, but then
I got a great recording of old tortoises having sex. No, you can have that. Yeah.
Well, I never launched the contest because I posted on social media like, hey, I have this great idea. What do you guys think? And like only 2 people respond and they're like, oh, that sounds disgusting. Like no one was interested in it. So I didn't
We should just do this as a private thing, like an exclusive club. I've got a recording of. This isn't really disgusting, but it's kind of. I made it in the Galapagos of iguanas. When they come out, they have to clear all the salt from their nose, and they do this great kind of spitting thing. And I managed to get a recording of that, and it's great because it's really heavily in stereo. It's like if this kind of spittoon, it just kind of flies across the mics, Wow. But yeah, maggots and flies. So a lot of that kit, because. I mean, one of the things I'm very rarely in charge of doing is, which might sound ridiculous given that we're on a show talking about podcasts, but one of the things I'm very rarely actually in charge of doing, unless we're out and about in the field, is sticking a mic in front of someone doing the narration or for a podcast. So I'm really not brilliantly clued up on what I would ideally like to stick in front of someone in a nice studio, these kind of lovely large diaphragm and kind of valve mics or whatever, because everything I've kind of acquired has been more designed for, I suppose, I've got Sherp's microphones that the little CCM, the tiny capsules, they're lovely, that I use those to do what's called double mid-side recording. So kind of, it's surround recording, but not with high information like ambisonics, but it's kind of, surround on the horizontal plane. So you're familiar like with the mid-side technique?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you add another mic to that pointing backwards, you get what's called double mid-side. So you just get, whereas mid-side would give you your stereo field more or less in front of you, this just fills it in at the back as well, sort of thing. So I use the little Sherps for that. So obviously in these scenarios, size is important. So everything I have is quite, there's quite compact stuff because it's geared towards field recording, really.
Right.
One of the coolest mics I have is a parabolic microphone, which you may have seen. It's a microphone that's mounted inside what more or less looks like a satellite dish. And the idea is that sound, when the dish, it takes sound, it hits the dish, and then it focuses it onto the mic in the middle, just like your satellite dish takes the information and focuses it on the receiver in the middle. Right. And it's what it gives you is, it's the most isolated sound you can get off a microphone. It's kind of what we would call acoustic isolation. It's not a kind of electrical bit of trickery to try and isolate sound, because you know what it's like. People have this idea that there's a kind of there's an equivalent of a telescopic zoom lens for a mic. I mean, they're not. We know that. Even if you put like a really tight shotgun on something, you can still hear stuff at the side. It attenuates it, but you'll still hear it. But the parabolic will get you as isolated a signal as you can really get. A lot of bird recordings that are really, really isolated will have been made on that. That's very cool. They're really great for kind of picking out tiny little aspects of sound.
That is
sorry.
cool.
I'm just I can send you links or a picture or whatever.
Yeah. When I sometimes when I think about people like podcast recording in a small place when there's 2 or 3 or 4 people sitting around a table, like even cardioid mics, there's going to be a bunch of bleed, and I was always like, I was always thinking like modern technology is there a way to figure out how to isolate sound even better? And I actually never heard of these parabolic mics. I heard of the old PZM microphones, but that was different. But parabolic was this sounds pretty cool.
They have a pretty kooky frequency response. So high frequencies I think are okay, but as you get lower, it gets kind of strange. I mean, you wouldn't. I don't think there's any way you'd want to or could use them in a kind of studio environment. They're very much a kind of outdoor thing. Okay. I think. But I'll send you some info on them. They're quite. I mean, you look ridiculous wandering around with them. It's like. It's, any pretense at being, like clandestine or, forget it. It's all out the window. You've got this big dish in your hand and you're waving it around.
See, now I want to go to Podfest, carry one around with me. That'd be
great. Yeah. And sometimes I have like camo on mine because if you're trying not to freak out animals, so it's covered in sort of military cloth. I mean, people just look at it and think, oh my God, what is this guy doing?
Oh, that's great. Now I want to do it. Oh, man.
Yeah. But it's you get incredible isolation when you use one of those.
And that's interesting what you say about the mid and high frequencies get isolated very well, but the low frequencies it gets a little sketchy.
Yeah.
That doesn't surprise me, but I don't know the physics of why that is, but that makes sense to me.
Yeah, a little knowledge is a bad thing, isn't it? I could probably
Stay tuned for the next episode where we go into physics.
Yeah, and we're going to teach you how to build a small nuclear power station. I know that so you get more. Sound gets more directional, doesn't it? I think as the frequencies get higher. So, for instance, the reason you can plant your sub more or less in a whole variety of positions, and it doesn't matter so much as opposed to say the tweeters on your monitors, is that we can't tell the directionality of the longer waveforms because they're kind of 8-12 feet or whatever. So they don't seem to come from a point source. Yeah. And the higher I think you go, the more it feels like. Speaking of that, I've done quite a lot of underwater recording as well with hydrophones.
Wow.
That's quite cool, yeah, because sound travels kind of 5 times faster under the water. So
really,
you get interesting stuff down there. I've recorded humpback whales and dolphins and things. It's incredible down there. Anyone who thinks it's quiet, it's not. It's a racket,
right? Well, they say those big whales they can be heard from like 1,000 miles. They can hear each other like 1,000 miles away or something.
Yeah. The area of communication they have is vast, and when you think about how much they rely on sound, it becomes ever more urgent for us not to kind of just beyond any, fill the oceans with sound pollution, because it really is a crucial way for them to live and navigate and stay together and find partners and find food and all the rest of it. Right. Yeah, but that's another 17-part podcast we'll get onto when we've done the nuclear power station stuff.
And I just want to mention real quick, you mentioned before how you don't really record like podcasts in person, like with people and voices and stuff. And like, I just want to point out to the listeners that you are a specialist. You're post-production, you're a composer and a mixer. And like, not everyone in the world knows every single aspect of recording. I mean, you know enough to get the files, and you know what it sounds like, and you know how to make it, and you know how to mold it into a great mix. That's might be the most valuable skill in audio production, I think. So
wow. I mean, and even in that, as you can tell, even in those areas, I'm constantly feeling like, that phrase "imposter syndrome." It partly goes back to sort of historically for me, because I originally studied music, and I really this is what I'm doing now is kind of, I think, what I wanted to do. But I got a bit scared off almost. When I got to university, people were so way ahead in the whole kind of writing music game and everything. So I did lots and lots of playing. I did lots of the kind of social side of music making, and then I went off into doing some music teaching, and then I became more or less entirely a journalist for a while. And I write comic strips and still do a bit of that actually. And I work for a newspaper here called The Guardian, and it's an amazing testament to a changing industry. That I used to work entirely in print as a sub-editor and occasional writer, and now I do music and sound design for their podcasts or films. So that's an industry that's really changed and developed and grown with the multimedia era. But so what I'm saying is I kind of floated around quite a long time before coming back to what I'm doing now, and boy, do I think every day, wow, God, if I'd stuck with this 20 years ago, what would I know now? I feel like I'm always playing catch up. And now, I think we all do. I think anyone who is sensitive to the intricacies of the area they're working in is always very aware of what they don't know. All the best people I know refer to it in that way. The time you want to watch out is when you meet the guy who says, yeah, I know it all, what do you want to know?
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. Any of these professional sports people, they're always practicing, always focused, and no one knows everything. So that's how we are. And but at the same time, as the famous Eastern saying goes, the eye cannot see itself. Like, you can't see yourself, Pascal. You don't know how far you've come and the level of what you're producing audio.
Yeah.
I mean, you kind of know, but you don't know like we know, right?
No, that's very nice. I mean, that is, I know exactly what you mean. And I think, it's tough, isn't it? I mean, I think what you have to kind of hold on to, what's the mast that you're clinging onto in this mad sea of information, and you're on our little raft, bobbing around. What you have to hang on to is your ears. You have to go, how does that sound okay to me?
Yep.
Is that how I want it to sound? And not get worried and bogged down with what is right and wrong, because what will lead you, I think, to create something that reflects you, and because of that might be something really nice and unusual and unique, will be just it will be you following your gut and your ear. I think you can find your personality just gets subsumed and lost if you go down too many kind of rabbit holes of thinking, well, what's right and wrong, how are they doing it? We all go through periods where we kind of copy a bit, and because we want to learn from that. But follow your ears, and they have to be your trusted companion, because without them, you're just you're gonna fall off the raft, I think.
Yeah, great point. And one of the biggest mistakes that amateurs make is they'll just add processing. They'll add an EQ, add a compressor. They'll just add, I have two great compressors, I'm going to use them both. And I have an EQ, I'm going to use them both.
And God, I have been so guilty of that. I remember when I first got an emulator of final stage tape mastering. So I think you're going to put it through, you're going to bang it through a kind of an emulation of tape just to give it some mystical. I mean, I would stick this thing on, and honestly, this is where the kind of psychoacoustics goes nuts. I've to this. I mean, what could I hear? Could I hear? I don't know. I mean, it's. I would play around with that thing with so little knowledge of what the hell I was doing. What is it Spider-Man's always saying? With great power comes great responsibility. With great plugins that you don't understand comes a great sort of riddle. I mean, I am so. I spent so long kind of putting compression on things with only a partial understanding of what the hell I was doing. And I will never stop feeling like that. But hopefully, as you say, you do move along and you do get better. And but it is, I mean, with so much out there, so much to choose from, so many kind of jewels shining at you saying, this is going to make your thing, this is going to be the one, I mean... I mean, I worked with a really super experienced mixer, and I won't name names I remember he was mixing something of mine, and he clicked on some plugin menu, that was like, it could have been compressors, could have been EQs, and literally like this list fell to the bottom of the screen. It was like biblical, it was like, and he, and he just sort of said, he said, you know what, I know what I use and I know what I like, and I just, out of guilt, every now and again, I just pick one of these other ones. And this is a guy, this is a guy who at the highest level spends his time doing nothing but mixing. Right. So what chance do I stand? I mean, I use the Fab Filter stuff. And again, it's like, because I've had it from the start and I know it, and I really like the way it displays everything. I probably use their EQs more, and compressors all the time. Now, do I dive out into other things at certain times? Yeah, I mean, I think something like putting a Sheps, on a channel plugin, is it the 73 or whatever? I really like that, and it does something I can't quite always sort of define. But what's interesting about some of these plugins is they obviously go back to an era where these things had fewer controls. There's like 3 parts to the EQ, so you can hear quite a dramatic difference when you stick something like that in. And I think it's sort of that's interesting and useful sometimes to just make a bold change. But again, one thing I really was reminded of on the Mixing with Mike series, which is an interesting one, is just how important it is when you're comparing something, when you're saying to yourself, is this better than that, to make sure the volume level is the same. Because honestly, I just think it's so easy to persuade yourself something's better because it sounds a bit louder. Yep. And it's happening all the time, You stick stuff on and you think, oh, yeah, great. Exactly. It's just got a bit louder, This is entry-level stuff for people who really understand mixing, but don't even get me onto mastering. I mean, literally, I feel like I'm kind of stirring a cauldron and putting stuff in, magic potions I don't understand, Oh, no, slowly it gets better. But there's always this... like in video games when you're wandering around and you can't quite see, in front of you, and it's like a fog that as you move, it kind of lifts. That's what it feels like,
Yeah.
Slowly moving through.
Yeah, and everyone feels that way. It's not just you, by the way.
Yeah, thank God.
Because here's the thing.
Yeah, that's why it's good to talk, you realize.
Yeah, because they're making new plugins too. Like there's one called Gulfos, which is like a automatic EQ. Like it takes resonant frequencies and you can either boost them or cut them. Yeah, and Oak Sound has Soothe, which is like, it's a de-esser sort of, but it does more than that, but it's intelligent. So they're making these intelligent EQs, intelligent de-essers, and in a way, those are sort of game-changing. So over the last few years, this is what I've been looking into them and trying them. So it's never going to end, right? They're always going to come up with better plugins that do things that used to take you 20 minutes to do. Now it does it in 10 seconds, right? So,
yeah, of course, yeah. And we should totally embrace that, because after all, what's a computer there to do? It should be there to do some of the dull stuff, And I think there's always a really interesting kind of conversation, if you like, that goes on between the machine and the person. And this is happening in sound design and mixing, just as it's happening in music. You have these moments where you step back and you go, hang on, am I writing the music here or is the machine? Some of the instruments I have, I mean, there's a composer friend of mine who calls it a one-finger lunch. You get these plugins and you pull them up and they're so sort of complex, and they might be based on 4 different sound worlds that kind of orbit each other, for instance. And you stick your finger on one key on the keyboard and it just kind of seems to just generate almost a whole track. Hence the kind of one-finger lunch idea. You can have your sandwich while writing a cue by just holding down one finger. Now, that can be useful. It can be great in some ways, but there are times when you have to kind of go, okay, who's driving at the moment? Am I driving the music here, or am I allowing technology to kind of drive me? I think it's not a right and wrong situation, but it is quite handy to kind of think, okay, who's driving? who's got their foot on the pedal? And I think that can happen with plugins too. It's like, yeah, look, if someone, as I say, I try to kind of, if I'm working on these aspects of podcasts that we're talking about, I try not to get involved with the dialogue. But of course I have to sometimes, because I'm holding like the master session, right? So if they're saying, oh, it sounds a bit clicky there, I'm going to end up sorting it, So of course the kind of isotope RX stuff is totally invaluable, because if it'll do it, well enough and transparently enough for me to stop me, chopping into the waveform thousands of times, it's great. We really want to welcome that kind of AI technology, but when it comes to kind of shaping sounds and kind of generating sound for us, I think it's just you sort of think, who's driving, who's in charge? It's like the 2001, the helm.
Yeah.
What are you doing?
Gotta
Dave?
be careful.
Yeah.
Okay, so one last question, and Barry, what do you think of this episode so far with Pascal Wyse?
Oh, forget it.
Right? You like it, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh, I was late on the trigger. You like it, Barry, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, baby. All right. Well, we need to know from you, Pascal. We need to know. We really want to know. I don't know if you'll share this. Let's see if you'll share this information. Tim Harford's voice on Cautionary Tales. He's the host, obviously. How do you process his voice? What plugins do you use? What do you do to his voice?
Ah, right. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
I fill the studio with helium and let it and let it go.
Pitch shift.
Yeah. So what did I do to his voice? Yes. So
in general, you don't have to get too specific if you want. Whatever.
I've got a pretty. So with that, I didn't need to do much by way of cleanup. So it came. Sometimes I will put in the RX vocal, cleanup thing, but only in quite a subtle way. It does change the sound, so I tend to use that quite sparingly.
Right.
But with Tim, I'll EQ him with Fab Filter EQ, the Q3 I think it is now at that stage, or Q2. Yep. I love the Fab Filter stuff. I think it's great. And then I will use their compressor, the C2, I think, Fab Filter. I have a kind of tweaked version of a really nice preset they have, which is called kind of Pro Voiceover, I think. But it's a parallel compression thing, and I fiddle around with that a little bit. Tim had a very bad cold through a lot of the series. He was very kind of, bunged up. And so you get that. It's quite tricky, sort of removing that very congested kind of head sound, which I think probably sits, I don't know, maybe 400 or 500 hertz. I'm not really sure. It's hard for me to talk in numbers about this stuff.
Yeah, I'd say it was often like that. Or even a little higher, 700-800.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. It's definitely not up at that kind of clarity range of 1 to 2K, but it's lower than that. I can almost hear it in my own voice now, actually. But so there was a need to give him a bit of air, so fiddle around with the Q3 to get a bit of that. And then I did in Cautionary Tales, I did discover the Vocal Rider plugin from Waves, which I think you might have discussed on another show.
Yeah, I love that.
It's really handy. Particularly if you've got to bow to the voice in these things. If you're creating sound design and music, you've got to park your ego a bit off to one side. What Tim is saying is the key bit of this. But on the other hand, there was moments where I really wanted to let the sound and the music kind of push a bit. And so Vocal Rider is really handy to have on a side chain there, responding to that mix of music and sound design. That's what I fed the Vocal Rider with, just to kind of let him surf on top of it. So again, back to your point, about this incredible array of increasingly intelligent plugins. That's doing something, of course, that I could have done manually. It's like, okay, I'd like the music to have a bit of a moment here, but I don't want to drown Tim, so let's bring Tim up. But it's, in the quick turnarounds, it's really handy to have that plugin. And if you treat it, I don't know, I think sometimes you can hear what it's doing, but if you treat it with a gently enough, it will do it pretty transparently. And I found that really good actually for kind of helping the energy of those bits. It's a subtle thing, but it stopped that feeling of a kind of a sound world being kind of a little bit too crushed by, and not being allowed to come through. It just somehow meant you could squash a bit more energy into the whole thing. So that was useful.
I want to ask you about that. Using the vocal rider with a sidechain. So just to be clear for the listeners, what you're doing is you're using the vocal rider on Tim's voice, but then you're feeding the music into the sidechain, because as the music gets louder, you want Tim's voice to also get louder, so it stays above the music. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
okay.
So I make a little submix of all the sound design and the music, and nothing else, and then I feed that into the vocal rider, so that so if I get a bit carried away with my organ or whatever, Tim's voice will just be lifted above it. Now most of the time it's set at such a level that it's not, it just moves the range of the voice up a little notch, and most of the time it's not having to do that too much, but it just means I can almost forget about that. I've got enough to think about,
right?
And then having to dive into Tim's part and kind of do little volume lifts here and there. If I can get something that'll do that for me, and obviously I can listen to it and make sure I'm happy with it, but if it saves me the business of having to draw that all in, that's great. I mean, the other layer of vocal interest in Cautionary Tales is the actors, because that's where you might be putting on kind of more unusual effects and stuff,
Right.
So I used a great plugin a lot with them called Indoor, which is made by Audio Ease, who are the same people who make Altiverb, and it's just one of those things that just sounds so incredibly realistic. It's convolution reverb again, but it's a really clever plugin. You stick it in and you get a very simple menu of environments. There's a restaurant, there's an empty hotel room, there's a garage, there's the inside of a car, whatever. And then when you click on it, a picture comes up, and there's a little speaker on a stand, and there's a mic on a stand, and you move them where you want them. They more or less. I mean, they have a certain number of available positions, but so you can just think to yourself, where is this person in the room, and where do we want to be listening to them from? And it creates such great, believable results. And so sometimes, if the actors were in a small office or something, or, I would stick them into places using that. And the actors are the only ones that really get sort of panned, left and right a little bit. Because, again, just, it's nice to differentiate them from Tim. If Tim's always in the center, then the actors sometimes, but not hard pan, just a little bit, just a nudge, so that.
Right.
And for conversations that's between two actors, that's obviously really helpful, just to help the believability of it. So on the actor track, Indoor was a really useful one. And also there's a fantastic thing called Speakerphone, again by Audio Ease. I'm a big fan of Audio Ease. Speakerphone is just this great thing where if you need your actor to come through a phone line or a toy or a gramophone, this has got all that, and it's such fun. It's amazing fun just putting people, into car boots, and you can literally close a car boot on someone. It's quite fun.
Wow, that's cool. And before I forget, I want to ask you: can you just you mentioned convolution reverb a few times? Can you just define that for everyone?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be
in general
well corrected below the line, I'm sure. But so I think what are called, if you have like a plug-in reverbs such as FabFilters Pro R or whatever, I think these are based on kind of algorithms, if you like, or averages of rooms. What a convolution reverb is, it means they've gone into the space in question, and through a process of carefully setting up microphones and speakers, they've emitted a special kind of pinging sounds or whatever, and recorded the response of the room. So what's great about that is it's incredibly realistic. And I'm a really strong believer, and I often think about the sound effects in Star Wars, the original Star Wars, how much they were based on real sounds. I think that the ear is very sensitive to the complex sounds of the real world, and when something really has come from something that's believable. But anyway, so convolution really has that. It creates that really believable sense of a space. But of course, when you click into something like Altiverb, which is a convolution reverb, you can literally say, St. Paul's Cathedral or the Hollywood Bowl, if they've done it. They have to be allowed into the space to make it. The cockpit of a Boeing 747, or and then so it's capturing real spaces and then turning them into reverbs, as opposed to what's algorithmic reverb, which uses a kind of mathematical model of a space. They both absolutely have their place, obviously. But I love the believability of convolution. Like, they've done things like lots of outdoor convolutions. So if you need someone to sound like they're in an alleyway between two houses, that sort of stuff.
Right.
It's great for that. But it's basically based on the idea that they go in and make a special recording of the place, and then model it.
Right.
So it's well worth checking out. I love the believability of it. Yeah.
So Pascal, this has been amazing. This might be my longest interview ever, but we just kept going, and it was great the whole time. So
yeah, I feel like we've only scratched the surface.
I know. Well, this is so you have to come back if you would. If you want to come back, I would love to have you back in maybe 6 months or a year.
I'll be. We should have a kind of really weird meta exercise where I argue with the person I am today, because I've learned.
I was going to say, if you come back in 6 months or a year, you might be using different plugins and different things.
Yeah,
me
I'll
too.
Be like, who was that guy you had on? He had a name like mine, but he was talking such crap.
So.
Wow.
You're on Twitter at Pascal Wyse. I'll put that in the show notes. Where should people go to find out more about you or anything like that?
Yeah, well, there's a website which is www.pascalwyse, all run together, and it's Wyse with a Y, so PASCALWYSE.com. And that's the main place where I suppose I dump things. And there's Twitter as well, and Cautionary Tales is out there, and you can, from your favorite outlets. And I think I'm hoping to do more stuff with Pushkin this year, so hopefully might get out to the US at some point.
That'd be cool. Well, if you come to any of the big conferences, maybe we can meet up.
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, well, I'll make sure I'll let you know.
Yeah.
But I'd be delighted to come there. If you want to do something else, let's do that. That'd be great fun.
Yeah, it'll be fun.
It's been a pleasure talking to you.
The last thing we have to do, great talking with you, man. It's been awesome, and everybody will end the usual way. So, Pascal, if you can, and everyone listening in their cars is going to do this too, but if you can actually yell, "Sound great." Okay?
Yeah.
We're going to all yell it at the same time.
Okay, are you going to count it in?
Yeah, I'm going to count it in. So we're going to yell "Sound great." So thank you, Pascal. Thank you, everyone, for listening to the Podcast Engineering Show. We'll see you next week. And here we go. Let's do it. Go! Sound
great! Yeah, oh yeah. No way. Great? Yeah, oh yeah. Yeah, oh yeah.
You walk away from me where, and you can't play that part so well. Why do you play it out on me now? You like to lose control where it's quite a feeling easy here. They float and drifting down now. You tell me that you found something better. How should I respond to that? It's a lie. I don't wanna hear it. What do you things we did still hold that meaning. And does it mean it's still the same? You're pushing me away. You worked your theories now where you're getting worked up on you now. You work your